Thanks so much for joining. I am Sylvia Centeno. I'm the Director of Educational Programs and Training here at It's On Us. And we have a really great conversation planned for you today on the topics of campus sexual assault and athletics. So before I pass it on to our amazing moderator, Tracey Vitchers, I'm sure most of you know her, our Executive Director, I just want to give a quick overview of our organization for anyone who's joining us for the first time and provide some community guidelines for the conversation. If everyone can turn their video off and mute themselves, that would be great. If you're not able to, please message Maeve Sheridan directly. Thank you. So It's On Us was founded in 2014 by our new president, Joe Biden, because he saw that there were low reporting rates and the prevalence of violence was going up. So our mission is to change the culture of gender-based violence in higher education through prevention education. So we do want to provide a trigger warning for this call specifically. Maeve, if you could please post our resources in the chat, that would be amazing. So for both panelists and participants, you do not have to share anything that you don't feel comfortable sharing today. If you prefer to talk about the way response made you feel or what you need without sharing your story, that's totally fine. But if you do end up sharing anything that could be triggering, please make sure to provide a trigger warning in the chat for anyone who might need to hop off the call or go on mute for a little bit. Sort of on the same lines, if anyone needs to take a break, please feel free to. This is a community space that we would love for you all to feel comfortable with. And on that note, as I see people participating in the chat already, I do want to ask if everyone can, if you want to and you feel comfortable, please share your name, pronouns, and where you're joining us from today. We encourage you to use the chat to communicate as much as you can. And on that note, I am going to pass it on to our ED, Tracey Vitchers.
Thanks so much, Sylvia, and welcome everyone to the final event of our 2-week-long Engaging Men series. Today, we are joined by our friends in this work, James Smith-Williams and Kyle Richard, to share and discuss the importance of changing the culture around sexual assault in the world of athletics. So grateful to have you both here. Some quick bios on our two friends who've joined us today. Kyle Richard is a sports activist, speaker, and advocate for sexual violence prevention. Kyle works with athletics departments, sports teams, Title IX departments, Greek life, and nonprofit organizations in his effort to prevent sexual, domestic, and gun violence through positive masculinity and manhood. It's On Us was very lucky to get to know Kyle a few years ago. He was a Biden Courage Award winner and was honored by now President Biden for his work. So we're so thrilled to be able to continue to engage him and work with him. We are also today joined by the wonderful James Smith-Williams, a graduate of North Carolina State University. He became the first NFL ambassador for Set the Expectation, who is one of our field partners. Set the Expectation's goal is dedicated to combating sexual and physical violence through raising awareness, giving back, education, and direct engagement with coaches, students, and athletes in high school, collegiate, and professional athletic programs. Now playing in the NFL for the Washington football team, James is working to take SDE's mission even further, and to date has led 2 different donation drives for domestic violence shelters. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you, Tracey. I appreciate that. He's glad to be
absolutely. Here. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Great. So we do have some facilitated questions that I'll be asking both of you. And if we do have time at the end, we will open it up for Q&A. So as we get close to the end, folks, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. So just to kick it off, I'd really like to just start by discussing the perceived culture in sports. Being a male athlete, what are some of the common stereotypes that are talked about in quote unquote locker room talks and masculinity?
I'll go ahead and hop on that one first. So for me, being an athlete, growing up in sports, I've been playing football since I was 4. You kind of hear, boys will be boys, guys are just being guys. It's kind of perceived notion that like it's okay, like the dismissive attitude towards certain behaviors. And that's something that I've heard kind of, in college, not so much at this level that, things are going to be okay. It's no big deal, stuff like that. And I think that, we've also had a problem, expressing emotions, how to feel as men, it's okay to be down, sad, however you feel is totally okay. And I think that's something that I've heard pretty often.
Yeah. And when we're talking about the stereotype of athletes, a lot of times, especially with athletes that happen to be men, um, it may seem like maybe through media and maybe through public view that we're in there talking about God, things that just should not be said, just things that are detrimental to women and gay people and LGBTQ plus community members. Um, that's not always the case, but it just depends. Like, it depends on who you bring in that locker room. It depends on who the coaching staffs bring in. It depends on the kind of person. And I know James mentioned earlier, we had a conversation earlier, and it struck me because he was talking about how it's not just in the locker room. Locker room talk isn't just necessarily what somebody's saying in the locker room. That same person is going to be doing the same things in the bar. It's going to be doing the same things in the household. So it is about the person first.
Yeah.
That is one of the stereotypes is, it's a lot of us doing it. It's not necessarily a lot of athletes doing it. It may be one cancer in the locker room or two cancers in the locker room that shouldn't be there in the first place.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of that, I think the locker room is a very unique space. And, if you've never played in sports, it's very hard to describe, but it is a safe space for those athletes, to voice their opinions. And I've actually had some of the best conversations of my life in the locker room because this is with someone that I trust and I value and I care about. And they feel the same way about me, even though we come from different backgrounds, socioeconomic status, different races, different political beliefs, but I can still sit down and be like, hey, like, what do you think about this? What's your approach to this? And I get an honest, opinion and answer that I probably wouldn't get from a stranger or knocking on someone's door because there's not that level of trust already, that foundation already put in place.
And that's locker room talk. That's the locker room talk we're trying to build. That's locker room talk. Not whatever. There was one politician one day that was saying, "Oh, it's just locker room talk." And that's just not the case. We have to reframe that or at least reframe that into people's minds who may be outside of athletics who think that it's all bad. There's a lot of good that goes on in locker rooms. We have to make sure that we use locker rooms and teams as a bridge to have great conversations.
Yeah, and I've been pretty, yeah, absolutely. I've been pretty fortunate to play at different levels, and I think in college it's more of that, we're just all hanging out, chilling, chit chatting, and then when you get to the NFL, this is my workspace, this is my work bubble. I need to protect that, and then there already are rules and stuff in place. I think it just varies person to person, but I do think that locker room talk should be framed more so as, I can have a real honest conversation about something I may not understand or want to know more about.
That's really great. I really love that reframing of this idea of locker room talk. And I was a college athlete, so I know how important those spaces are for teammates to bond and get to know each other and to just talk about the different struggles that they might be facing, whether it's on the field or in their classes or just in their personal lives. And you said that sometimes that, Kyle, you mentioned that like sometimes there is like that one cancer or that two cancers that does say the thing that's not okay, whether it's about women or about the LGBTQ community or if it's racially charged. So I'm wondering, like, what happens? Like, does anyone try to change the course of those conversations when they do start to go downhill? Like, what is that, redirecting, educating, trying to change the conversation, have that moment of confronting that person look like?
Yeah. So, James, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I'll hop on real quick. Just add a really quick thought.
No doubt.
I think it definitely depends on the culture of the team. I think that's what kind of all falls back on. I think, if you're in a locker room that has a great coaching staff, that has a strong set of beliefs, or with really good people, then you're going to see that reflected in that moment, because you're going to be told, hey, that was not okay. Here's why. If you don't understand, like, please seek to learn more. But this isn't just okay to spew these certain things out because it's offensive, and we don't stand for that here. I think that is really the true testament to the culture of your team and your organization.
I love that. I love that. And to piggyback off that, when you was talking about it comes from the top down, it also goes from the bottom up. So, you know, the best teams police, themselves. The players police themselves. And to do that, I know I've had several instances, whether it was high school, whether it was college, where it was somebody would be saying something that I just don't agree with. Maybe they were talking about body count, like, oh, what's your body count? Like, oh, your body count's too low. What are you doing? Things like that. So it's really about, for me, it was more about making them uncomfortable, making them feel uncomfortable saying that. So it doesn't necessarily, we're still teammates at the end of the day, and people do make mistakes, and that's no excuse. We have to make sure that we are making them uncomfortable when they say things like that. If everybody feels uncomfortable in a room when you're talking about somebody's body count and how much sex they have, and how they feel about particular people, you have to make them feel uncomfortable, whether it's with words, whether it's just like, what are you even talking about? Like, why are you even talking about this? In your own way. Everybody has their own way of being an active bystander. When it comes to locker room, the dirty locker room talk, not the locker room talk that James and I, we want to get going. It's really about making them feel uncomfortable, letting them know it's not a part of this culture.
That's awesome. You talked about like that personal decision to step in and to say something or to take action if you do hear something like that. Can you both just talk a little bit about what you have done? We sort of touched on this in your bio, but sort of go a little bit deeper about what you do and what you've done to support and promote awareness on sexual assault and how to change that culture.
So for me, I don't go anymore virtually right now, but I typically go into schools, maybe work with the Title IX or athletic departments, sports teams, things like Greek life. And when I go do those talks, I'm really trying to promote that vulnerability. And I can't help anybody. And I realized this over time, even the first time we met, and I think it was 2018. I didn't really know how I could really help with the cause. I wasn't really there yet fully. But then I started realizing, and shout out to Brenda Tracey. I know James probably could shout her out too. I heard survivor Brenda Tracey from Oregon. She spoke about her gang rape, and trigger warning. She was gang raped, and I remember hearing her story from her mouth, and it was just so vulnerable and so detailed. And I realized, like, wow, I could tell her things now about myself. So for me, when I go talk to these a lot of men, but also women in the same room, I talk about manhood. I talk about my struggle trying to be a man. James and I are 23 years old, and we're still trying to figure out ourselves. But it's really about promoting vulnerability, telling men, like, listen, if you're not okay, there's a ton of people that aren't okay. For me as a captain, I think one of the things I lacked at was being vulnerable with my teammates all the time. I thought that I was sorry, somebody in the chat just said go Dragons. I gotta shout them out, go Dragons. But for me, I felt like I wasn't fully vulnerable. I was the team captain for 2 years in college, and I wanted to show like I was like this, not the macho man. I wanted to be there for people, but I felt like I was helping them in a way that wasn't as best I could. I should have told them things about myself that I never told anybody. I should have been more vulnerable. I shouldn't have made it seem like they were the only one going through something. But going into my senior year, I definitely stepped up at that, and I was able to help my teammates a lot more just by being vulnerable and telling men, hey, we're all in this fight together. And bonding through trauma was one thing. For me, obviously, I was a victim of gun violence, and I know that I was like, I don't know if we could, sexual violence is one of those things where I wasn't too aware and too knowledgeable of years ago. And I realized, like, wow, like we all have traumas. We all have our separate traumas. We all face different things. And whether it's sexual violence, gun violence, or whether it's domestic violence, we all have some type of trauma to bond over. So it's one of the things that I like to talk about.
Yeah, and for me, my journey, I guess, started kind of similar to Kyle's. Is I met Brenda Tracey. She came to NC State. She gave a speech, and I mean, the thing that will stick me for the rest of my life is she issued a challenge. You know, if you are a good man, as you say you are, like, what are you doing to help out in this cause? And I mean, that really resonated with me and still does to this day. And from that moment forward, I was also a captain at NC State, and we led a donation drive, Interact Local Domestic Violence Shelter. And then as I went through my pre-draft process, Brenda reached out to me and she offered me the role as her first NFL ambassador. And of course, I was over the moon about it, super excited. And, you know, so I've been working with Brenda ever since. And I think my mission and my personal goal is to reach out in my community. So in Raleigh, it was interacting, helping that shelter out and, you know, going on campus and having people come listen to speeches that we had as like student union and stuff like that. And now in Washington, D.C. or the Northern Virginia area, I'm partnered with the DC Coalition Against Sexual Violence and Sexual Assault, and working with them. We just had an awesome holiday fundraiser. I think we raised like, I don't know, $5,000 in toys and gifts for people who are in shelters. Just stuff like that is what I guess where I'm kind of finding myself right now is how can I use my platform or my voice to really amplify this and, you know, get in front of, you know, the league and NFLPA and just say like, this is the issue that us players care about. We really want to press the issue on this and we want to see some real tangible results.
Absolutely. And both of you have just become some amazing advocates. And Kyle, you touched on this a little bit about that need for vulnerability when you are talking about sensitive issues and challenging topics like sexual assault or gun violence. I'm wondering, like, you know, that sensitivity and that vulnerability is obviously a key part of it. Do you think that there are other reasons why maybe male athletes struggle to talk about and come out against sexual assault, and why maybe they aren't, you know, front and center advocating for this issue in the way that both of you are?
So for me, I talk about think about a room with like 4 people in it, right? It's like you know your friends, maybe you're not too friendly with them, but you know them. You're just sitting down playing video games for whatever sake, and somebody says something about you know, oh, you know, she was lying, you know, she didn't get raped, she didn't get sexually assaulted, she was lying. For the most part, you know, growing up, kids are just going to be like, yeah, I mean, if he's so certain about that, then I guess that's just what it is, you know, not really questioning it. And especially the culture where I grew up, especially where it's like, yeah, you know, they lie all the time. They lie on us. Um, there's, you know, and it's as if we never talk about necessarily the sexual assault. We talk about the lie. And that's more cultural. But if you're in a room with 4 people and one person says, you know, she's a liar, and nobody expands on that, nobody joins that conversation and rebuts with, well, maybe, you know, maybe there's more to it, you know, you don't have to get into full detail about everything, but just have a person in there that says, hey, you know, slow down. What are you talking about? If they're talking negatively on somebody that's trans, oh no, trans woman, she can't be a woman, right? If you're letting that person just go on and rabble, and the other 4 people in the room might end up, you know, just saying yeah, even though on the inside they're saying no, that's not true. So it really does take a person in the within that 4 people to just speak up, because if that person speaks up, maybe the other 2 people that are now, you know, we're in the midst of how to react to it, to that kind of talk and how to react to that kind of attitude, maybe they're now they're it's easier for them to really show up and say, hey, you know, yeah, he's right, you shouldn't be talking like that. So it's really about one person speaking up, and you have to do it quick. You can't really sit on it. If somebody's talking about, you know, uh somebody being gay and how you know there's something about like how gay people may be soft, or whatever the case may be, soft, let's just say soft, and you know, you hear that, you have to do it right away, or else the next conversation is going to come up, the next topic is going to come up, and now you're just left there sitting, wow, I should have said something there, and now I can't even say it or else it looks weird, which is not necessarily true. You could, after that conversation takes place, you could pull somebody aside, but that's not as effective, because now you're only pulling one person aside and talking to that person instead of letting the whole group that you're around know, listen, I don't stand for that. All right, you talk like that anywhere else, but not around me. That's now another moment in the day where that person is not going to talk about, you know, anti-gay kind of sentiment. They're not going to be talking about that around you. So that's, you did your part. So we have to build that kind of culture of speaking up and doing it as fast as possible.
That's great. James, do you have anything else you'd want to add to what Kyle said?
No, I agree with that. I think once again, it's about building a culture. I think, sports is especially football, right? And you get this stereotype, like we said earlier, that, you have to be tough, you have to be rugged, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I think that it's about saying, okay, at the end of the day, it's about developing, young men to be good people in society, and that you want these to be the forefront of the people who have this large platform, this large voice, to be the absolute best people so they can push the message, and they'll have a broader reach. I think that I agree with everything Kyle said for sure.
That's great. With both of the work that you have, with the work both of you have done in speaking to college students, you said, you're not just speaking to young men, you're often speaking to young women who are also athletes, you're speaking to folks who might be survivors themselves. What have you seen in terms of like the barriers for student athletes and coming forward and saying, hey, I was sexually assaulted, I am a survivor, and this is my experience? What kind of experiences have you had with that?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I apologize.
Oh no, it's all good. It's all good. So I've only encountered a few survivors that were athletes that came forward. Unfortunately, we all know that we definitely do know some survivors who never come forward. I mean, for the mass majority of them. But what are some things that I think that may be a barrier is the question, right? So one of the things I think could be potentially be a barrier is that culturally, I mean, if we think about how much support a perpetrator may get immediately if something comes out. If a survivor comes forward, and one word gets out about the potential perpetrator, then for some reason in this culture, there's plenty of reasons, but that person typically gets more support, gets the whole room, to back them rather than the survivor. Then you get the victim blaming, then you get the liar talk. And nobody wants to go through that. I can't imagine what that's like to go through that. I know plenty of survivors that do go through that, have been through that, and still continually go through that year after year after year. But it is about we have to really. It's hard to put ourselves in their shoes, especially an athlete who dedicated their whole time to this school and probably thought it was going to be the best time ever, and now you're dealing with that kind of trauma, and now you don't even know if you could go forward because you're scared that somebody's going to out you.
Yeah. So Brenda and I actually were talking about this, and she raised a great point to me that I believe is just super relevant, is that, athletes are usually sexually assaulted or assaulted by other athletes because that's just who you're around the most often. And if that's the case, you have to think about the fact that they're in the same social circle, who she's going to go and report this person to the same person that already knows the other athlete. Like it really intertwines and make it very complicated. I think that's like a really big barrier to consider, is like, okay, like even the resources are in place, like how is this being reported? How is that whole process being handled?
Absolutely. And, I was, both of you are football players. I was a swimmer in college. And I know that one of the challenges that often comes up when you have sports where both genders are practicing together. And if there's a sexual assault that happens between two members of the same team, they're both practicing together, that can also create a really fractured environment within the team when it comes to folks not wanting to speak out against their teammate, even if they were victimized by them, worried about what's happening, with the team culturally, et cetera. Sort of on that, I mean, what do you both feel are the sort of responsibilities of coaching staff in this environment to have some of these conversations with players early on, and like going all the way down to high school and middle school, all the way through professional athletes? Like, what do you all feel is that responsibility for coaches to be having some of these conversations?
Yeah, so I mean, just to speak to what I know, obviously I play for Washington. Everyone knows what has happened and what has been written about. I'm not going to shy away from that. And I think to speak to that is, I wasn't there when that happened. I'm a rookie. But when Ron Rivera came in, Ron really emphasized that, we are going to be a team of outstanding men who act is in the society in a certain way. And I think that he really set the bar for the culture. So as Kyle mentioned earlier, you have the top-down approach, and I think that has been something that's really resonated with us as an organization. Is that Ron Rivera is going to lead the way, and we're going to follow in his footsteps. So I think that as a coaching staff, you have a lot of pressure, and you see it happen, way too often, where a lot of big time coaches and big time programs let stuff slide underneath the carpet, pushes issues to the side. And, then a couple years down the road, you get released and all these scandals and all these things are happening because the coaching staff okayed it and told his players, like, this is okay if you do this. And that's what it is. When things happen without repercussions, you're telling someone it's okay. So I think that's a huge responsibility in the coaching staff, is that you are truly setting the bar for the culture that you want to have in your team.
And at that level, that's important for Ron Rivera to show that culture change and show that you could come in and set the culture right away. I think it may be discouraging for like high school coaches or college coaches too, where it's like, wow, I have to inherit this mess. But to see, the example that he set there, that was impressive. And also, you said middle school, high school. For middle school, I think we underestimate how important coaching is at the young ages, especially even like Pop Warner football, youth football. They're the foundation. They mold a lot of us. We've been playing football forever, and we got a lot of our attitudes in the first couple of years and how we feel about football and how we're supposed to act. Is it late in the NFL? It's never too late to really set a culture for somebody. You never know where somebody grew up. You never know what they learned. Even when it comes to consent training, high school coaches, I don't know, how many coaches in high school are talking about consent or talking about masculinity and talking about how to be as a man. And that's important. I was blessed to have a great high school coach who's all about culture. He won't even let us touch a ball during practice. If we had somebody mess up in class or say something about a girl, we were running the whole practice. And that's important especially at the younger ages, to set that standard. By the time you get to college, those college coaches, it's up to them to recruit. They're the recruiting coordinators, especially head coaches for the most part. They're the ones that give the yes or no to a lot of these recruits. If they're recruiting people that constantly harm others, you're not doing your job as a head coach, no matter how good your play calling is, no matter how good your scheme is. Your culture is not there. Your culture is not set. It's your job as a coach to recruit the right kids. And once they're in your hands, that is your responsibility as a coach. You have to, groom. You have to make sure that they're groomed into great young men. It's still about development at the college stage. And James, you could even argue that NFL is still about molding men. I don't know what the average age in the NFL is, but I'm thinking it's like 24, 25.
Yeah, young. In the grand scheme of things, really young. Yeah.
Right.
And to really piggyback off that, I really agree. I think it kind of goes like even bigger pictures. Like, okay, like the college coach is just focused on winning, but why? Like, who's in his ear? What's the AD telling them? Like, are they saying, hey, it's okay if this happens off the field as long as we win the conference? Right? What do the boosters care about? It goes back to the whole idea of like, this is a cultural issue. It's magnified in sports, but it's just so much bigger.
Right.
Absolutely. And, sort of speaking about, James, you sort of led to my next question. In speaking about, these other factors that come into play, whether that's, the college and university president, Title IX, et cetera, there are other bodies at all levels that also have an impact on setting the tone, setting expectations, setting what behavior is and isn't going to be allowed. What do you feel the role of organizations like the NCAA or like the NFL, Major League Baseball, et cetera, these like big networks that oversee all of these teams, what do you feel their responsibility is for working to combat sexual assault?
Yeah, I think for one, especially at this level, you need to have education, right? Like, it's because to me and my beliefs is someone's been failed along the way, right? Someone's been failed that they weren't taught what consent was, what it should look like. Like, they've been failed along the way, and it's the job of the NCAA, NFL. Like, if you're going to have people in your organization to represent you, you need to educate them. You have to have these conversations with them. You can't shy away from it. You can't just think they will police themselves. Like, you need to have real conversations with everyone involved in your organization. And I think that, it's definitely become more prevalent, is what I've seen, especially in college towards the end there. They really took the holistic approach to the mental well-being. It's more so than just how are you performing in the classroom, how are you performing on the field. It's about everything in between, all the glue that holds it together.
I'm all for that too, because a lot of what I do is for prevention, and I wanted to, when I was first coming into work, I was like, what can I really help with? And that was prevention. I could go to schools and I could talk about how we feel as men, and what James just beautifully said. Um, and it's, rather than just prevention, when somebody does do something that's harmful, or especially at the college level, that's where I have the most knowledge of. There's not a lot of tough litigation towards athletes that may have committed some sexual violence, or some type of violence. It's typically, like James said, swept under the rug. You may get a couple game suspension. You may not even get kicked out of school, and a lot of times. I know the Tracey rule, Brenda Tracey, she like the person that we mentioned before, the founder of Set the Expectation. The Tracey rule is one of the most comprehensive rules for schools. And why aren't more people hopping on that? Well, is it too tough? No, I don't think it's too tough. Um, it's just really granting people accountability. It's granting schools the the ability to hold people accountable. We don't see enough of that. It's not tough enough. Now, do I think that prevention should be at the forefront as well with tough litigation? Yes, I think we should be teaching people, and James said it beautifully. Somebody's been failed along the way. We need to make sure that rather than just punishing somebody, we are actually grooming them, and we're helping them. Like we said before, people are young. We need to make sure that people are getting that education, but that is no excuse. There is no excuse for sexual violence. There's no excuse for domestic violence. We should be having the conversation more in the NCAA. We should be putting pressure on schools every year. It shouldn't be just one meeting, one NCAA meeting, and then, oh, we're not going to talk about it for a couple of years because we had that meeting already. We put a couple more rules in there. We need to really sit down with the NCAA, the NFL, the MLB, and they need to do it internally and say, listen, we need to prevent violence. And when violence does happen, we have to show that we are the standard. The world is watching us. We have so much power here. We have $1 billion organizations. Our faces are everywhere. We have to make sure that we are holding people accountable, so that not just in sports, because sports is the biggest metaphor for real life. If it happens in sports and somebody's being held accountable in sports, maybe somebody down the line, at the train station gets the same punishment, because we feel, that need for accountability, and we feel that need for prevention.
And I think that it kind of speaks to what is the true focus, right? Like, what is the focus of college athletics? Like honestly, like what are we trying to groom young adults to go out in society and be good members of society? Or is it about winning as many games as possible, fudging the gray areas because it's about the money? Like that is kind of like where it comes down to when you run your program or wherever your involvement is what is the true focus of college athletics?
And it does go hand in hand too. We have seen uh teams that win a lot that aren't great teams, but in terms of culture, we have seen teams win a lot. But I do believe that if we make great young men or great young women, and we tell them about how to treat others the right way with respect, I think that does carry over. I mean, into your play, into being a good player, into being a responsible and respectful player for your coaching staff, maybe. It's just, you could groom somebody, off the field, and it may help them on the field. It may help their relationships with their teammates. It may help them be better leaders for their teammates. So it doesn't just stop on the off field stuff. If you groom somebody off the field really well, and you help them off the field really well, you support them, they will feel like, especially if you're telling them, like, yeah, men go through things, and maybe their mental health was at stake at one point. That's going to help them on the field. That's only going to help the team if each player is feeling like they know enough, and they're constantly learning about things off the field, and they're constantly getting that support and that education. So that could only help on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another good question too, we ask this as part of all of our Engaging Men series panels or conversations. What advice would you both have for young male student athletes who maybe want to get involved as allies in the movement to combat sexual assault? What advice do you give them about getting started in this work?
Yeah, so I think for me, go to your local student body organization. There, I promise you, there's something on your campus that is addressing this. It's on civic exploitation. There's all these great um, organizations set up around this issue that want volunteers. And I think the best place to start is right there, either in your own locker room or your own classroom, but just your community as a whole is always the best place to start.
Yeah, and it's not about being the biggest voice in that room when you're trying to help. I mean, um, we aren't, we're relatively young people. And when I first started the work, I was in rooms where I was speaking on behalf of my story, but I was in conferences and I'm just writing things down. I'm like, wow, like, these people know so much and it's on us and set the expectation, they know so much. Um, and it's important that, you don't have to know everything right now to get involved. I mean, you see that there's a problem though, right? Like, that there's a problem. You've talked to people, you've talked to survivors, survivors, whether you think that they're survivors or not. People that are around you. So uh taking that first step and just showing up, like James said, show up, right? Put your body in the place. That's most important. You're gonna realize, like, wow, like I have a bigger voice than I thought I did, most likely. And if you don't, it's okay. You're still helping in a way. You're still supporting an organization on your campus that can possibly give you skills, give you life skills for the future. It's not, maybe when you're 40 years old, you'll remember a training that you did, like maybe a green dot training on your campus. Maybe you'll remember that one day and you actually will use it. There's a whole bunch of people that I run into that don't even realize that they're a part of the change, and they'll be 40. I ran into an Uber driver. I was at a speaking engagement in Houston one time, and the Uber driver told me a story. He was like, you, because I told him what I do. And he was like, you do what? That's crazy, man. He was like, wait. He's like, I remember like 20 years ago that I was at a party and this girl, somebody slipped a drink and there were 3 guys in the bathroom with her and I took her out before they did anything, you know? And I heard this story and I'm like, bro, hold on. Sorry. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I'm getting a little technical issues here.
You're good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can hear you.
So, basically he's telling me, he's like, wow, like I can't believe it, I haven't thought about that until now. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. It's incredible how 20 years ago you remember something from 20 years ago, and then he's like, what, wait, I did that one more time, I remember this one guy was trying to take advantage. So I'm like, wow, like imagine if he realized he saved somebody's life. Like imagine, like he didn't know that until 20 years down the line. So if you go into an organization when you're 18 or 17 or even in high school, even younger than that, you may learn something. You might say something in that room. Maybe there's a survivor in that room that will remember that the whole life, and you will have no idea. And then it'll all come back around. So it's all good karma. It's all good. It's all positive for the movement. It's all positive for helping people and helping yourself to get involved on your campus. Do those bystander intervention trainings. Get involved with whatever you have there. If it's on us, set the expectation, and just put your body out there and help out, because somebody's watching you at all times, especially if you're an athlete. And you see athletes, if you see an athlete with their jersey on at a James and set the expectation a donation drive, you see athletes there doing that, helping out with that kind of stuff, you best believe people on that campus are gonna show up and they're gonna help out.
That's awesome. Thank you both so much. We have about 15 minutes left, so we do want to start taking questions from the audience. If you have questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll get them. We want to make sure, and we will try to get through as many of the audience questions as possible. I know we're going to have a lot of them. And if there are any that are outstanding, we will try to follow up with you directly afterwards if we're not able to get to them in the time allotted. So thank you, everybody, for all of your questions. One of the questions from the audience is, Let me see. How do you respond to pushback from other men who might say, why are you being so insensitive? Stop being so sensitive. Stop talking about this issue. And they're clearly not comfortable with that vulnerability. How do you engage with those folks?
So, I mean, what I've seen in my locker room, in my experience, that's all I can speak to is I to this day, I've never been challenged by another one of my teammates when I've said something like, "Hey, like, even now as a rookie, when I speak out about what I care about and my beliefs and my set expectation, everyone respects that. And people who don't respect it, like that, I really honestly have never encountered that pushback. It's when you're in the locker room and you have that personal bond, because it's very different when you're an athlete and this is your teammate. This is someone that you know and respect and that you've been with and you've been through games and practices that when you speak to them about things that are like, are very important to you in your heart, they're going to listen because you already have that bond in place. You already have that a connection with them.
I'm pretty similar to James. I mean, I have received less pushback for the work that I do. I think it's because you could tell with James, and I'm sure you could tell with me, is that we just genuinely care. And if somebody genuinely cares about something, it's hard to tell them no. It's hard to shut them down. And that's where it has to start with. That's like the foundational part, is like caring about it. If somebody sees you care so much about something, they might have cared on the inside, and now they might show I got overwhelming support from at least my teammates online, and like maybe some articles or whatever the case may be, in some comments. There's always going to be some hate. I got like Captain Save a Ho or whatever the case may be. There's going to be little things like that, and you just got to kind of, it is disrespectful as hell, and but you take it for what it is. I understood that the culture isn't all the way there yet. I've gotten pushback by people about, oh, but how do you know she's not lying? How do you know? It's like, it's not about knowing, it's about caring. You have to care that this is happening so often, and care that you could be a part of the change and part of the solution. So a lot of people don't realize that their words matter, especially if you're an athlete. If you push back against me for violence prevention, what are you telling others? What are you saying to others? So I think that it's important that rather than look at the negatives and what people are saying that are negative, really think about the support that we've been receiving from a lot, overwhelmingly men. Of course, women who have been in this fight for years and years and decades, and actually centuries. But it's important that we realize that if there's men supporting you, look to them. We don't have to look at the negatives. We could stay with the positives in this sense.
Amen. So we have a lot of people who are asking about booking the two of you for Sexual Assault Awareness Month speaking engagements. I know Brenda has said in the chat that she's happy to help with that. Also, please email contact@it'sonus.org, and we will make sure that your requests get forwarded to Kyle and James. I know they're amazing speakers. We're lucky to have them. We are happy to help facilitate that for you all for April. We know Sam is right around the corner. Another question from the audience. We have a group working on healthy masculinity and how toxic masculinity fuels violence. What advice do you have for us to help to how to engage our male athletes and to reach out to them?
It goes along the lines of that vulnerability that we touched on before. A lot of men, when they hear about sexual violence or domestic violence, right away, it seems like, oh, I'm the target. Here I am, I'm the bullseye. I don't do that stuff. I don't do it, so it doesn't matter to me. So we have to find a way how to let people know that they're a part of the change. Let people know that they could really work to promote awareness and prevent violence just as much as anybody else. And the way to do that, that was the tricky part. But I've got, like I said, with vulnerability, I've gotten an overwhelming response, especially from like male athletes, where I'll talk about some things that I wouldn't tell anybody in person when I'm doing a speaking engagement, and all of a sudden I'm getting reached out like, yo, listen, this happened to me too. When I was a kid, this may have happened to me, and I appreciate you for talking about that, and I appreciate you just being as honest as possible. It must have been brutal, and it is brutal talking about it. It's hard, but when I get people to reach back out and say, yo, how can I get involved? And I give them their school's resources or what the case may be, to get involved specifically there. That's what really brings people together, is talk about something that, you know, allow people to be vulnerable with you. Say something that's so personal to you that, they pretty much feel like the need to, not even the need, but the want to, the desire to make a difference and make a change, because they may be dealing with it themselves. They just never had somebody tell them that they're a part of it. Is rather, oh, you're a football player, how do you feel about sexual violence? Then all of a sudden it's oh, I can't be involved in that, even though, hey, let's just be realistic. People, there are football players that, there are a bunch of athletes that do perpetrate violence. It's not the overwhelming majority, not even close. The overwhelming majority are great people that can make a difference, and kind of like zero out that number of athletes that are doing it. But it's really about getting people involved by being vulnerable with them and letting them know that they're a part of it.
Yeah, and I think for me, like I just referenced back to Brenda Tracy, I think the way she approaches it is so amazing, because she came to us as like, hey, like, yeah, here's the issue, but I believe that you guys are the solution. Not like, let me bang home this point of things that have been done wrong, things like that. No, no, no. Like, here's my story. Here's what's been done wrong to me. But I think you guys are the vision moving forward. You're the future moving forward. I think that approach is just so much more engaging. And then on top of that, I think you have to just be real. Like, I think sometimes in conversations like this, people don't use proper terminology. You're not just being truthfully blunt and honest. And I think like that waters down the message a lot. Like when Brenda speaks, it is very real. And then anyone that's heard it knows it's very real. And I think that helps deliver the message more, because you're not being babied along the way. Like if you're in the college setting, we're all adults, right? And you are relied upon in society to be an adult. So you need to speak to them and treat them as such.
Great. Kyle, a question related to what you had mentioned about talking about Greek life, and talking to Greek life and your role. What do you think is similar or different, if at all, when you're talking to members of fraternities about your story and the work that you've done in this? Do you change anything about your presentation? Do you approach it differently? Does any insight on how you have this similar conversation, but with fraternities and Greek life?
So what I mentioned before, it's a cliche, but sports are the greatest metaphor for real life, right? So not much does change. And I've spoken to Greek lives in combination with athletics. And it is actually pretty, it's not, I'd say it's pretty easy to maybe change some of the ways, the metaphors that you use, rather than locker room talk. It's, how are you talking on that Friday night, on a Thursday night mixer? Just like make it personalized for Greek life. Let them know, like, yeah, listen, if you are at a party, it's hard for, I guess, administration to get into those, partying kind of things. But for me, it's relatively easy. I could come in there and talk about my college life and things like that. So, but it's not that I really changed much. I mean, Greek lives, in my opinion, are teams too, and they're just in a different form. They don't wear shoulder pads, but but they, Greek life, they're a team. Each organization's a team. I think that it may be a little different where it's, if there's multiple Greek life organizations on campus, and some are different than others about their attitudes. And then some people will say, oh, we do our training once a year, or we do it. We're fine. You have to let them know that, no, like, you're still a part of this. You have to be really anti-violence. You have to really show up. But I've talked to some great Greek leaders that even go to other Greek organizations on campus. So it'll be one Greek leader, and he'll provide the message or set the tone for the other organizations that were on that same exact campus, like eight or nine. And one Greek life member did that. Another school, it was just smaller numbers of Greek organizations, but they kind of, I like how I do like when Greek lives kind of like mesh in this movement, because you could compete or you could rival, whatever the case may be, about a whole bunch of other things. But for this specific movement, I think it's important for the Greek lives to work together on that, and that'll make a bigger movement on those campuses, especially if Greek life runs the campus.
Absolutely. They are teams in their own way, like you said, Kyle. That's absolutely true. So one closing question for both of you. what gives you hope for the future of the role of male athletes in sexual assault prevention?
I think for me is just seeing how prevalent it's become. You know, like I don't know. I can only speak to my experience being in college. When I was a freshman before I left, it's just the narrative completely changed, completely shifted. It's being pushed to the forefront. You know, you have people traveling the country and speaking and engaging all these athletes. You know, you see it when I see it in my own locker room. People will finally say, "Oh, okay, I'm understanding more. I'm understanding what I didn't see right." Like I'm starting to really bridge that gap. And for me, it's really awesome because it's such a supportive, caring environment that I just, in my short time, right, in athletics, has just completely changed.
So I thought I was a little more hopeful. I'll say last year, pre coronavirus. I think I was a little bit more hopeful about, there was so much momentum. I felt like there was a lot of conversations going on around violence prevention, um, so much work being done. But then, after, this whole mess of a year, I started realizing, like, a lot of us kind of sat back and we're looking at life in different ways, which is important too. Even for me as a person that talks about violence prevention so much, it's hard to get away from that. And I have to kind of sit down and say, like, wow, this is crazy. Like, life is crazy right now. Um, but I was definitely more hopeful pre coronavirus, but I had a conversation. I can't remember who I was talking with, but we were talking about how there's going to be a big need for it after this is all over with, and even now, I mean, it's a huge need right now. But I think it's going to come back around, and unfortunately, I don't know. I'm a little scared, to be honest with you. I'm a little scared for what happens after coronavirus. I'm scared for what happens when the bars open up and the clubs open up. I don't know how much is pent up violence. I don't know how much potential there is for that. And it's real unfortunate, that I'm thinking like that. I'm not trying to be a pessimist. I'm more of an optimistic person. I still want to do my best and do my all for the fight, and I'm going to. But it's really hard thinking about what might happen after this all. Just to be true, just to be real.
Absolutely, Kyle. And it's definitely something that here on It's on Us we're grappling with. Pre-COVID, everybody was really moving and grooving, pushing the consent education, pushing prevention education, active bystander intervention. We were in the middle of our national training tour when COVID hit and school shut down. And it's definitely a concern. And I know we recognize, right, that you have a lot of students who are freshmen this year who aren't on campus potentially, or they're sort of hybrid learning. They maybe haven't had the comprehensive sexual assault prevention education that they would have had if we didn't have the pandemic hit and schools close at the start of the school year. And then you're going to have a whole new freshman class coming in the fall. So there's a lot of education that's going to have to happen. But, we're so grateful to both of you being partners in this work. And I think, if we continue to team up the way that we have been, we can make sure that we're getting these really important messages spread far and wide. I'm going to turn it back over to Sylvia just to close out the session. But James and Kyle, thank you both so much for joining us today. It was so great to have both of you. We're so grateful to all of your continued partnership and support for this movement.
Thank you so much, Tracey. Appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey everyone. Wow. Thank you so much, Kyle, James, Tracey, for such a great conversation. I could probably go on for a really long time about all of the times that gave me chills. To anyone who is wondering, this will be recorded, and this is recorded, and we are going to be providing the link to that on our YouTube channel at the end of next week. So please look out for that. It's open to anyone who would like to use it for any reason. To anyone who would like to connect with us or with James or Kyle, please feel free to, Maeve, if you can paste our email or contact that email, that would be great. And then we are also, thank you, Maeve, posting any resources in case anyone needs any sort of support. This is just the beginning of this conversation. We're going to continue to have these really great conversations And we really appreciate how involved everyone has been in the chat and with your questions. So thank you so much. Again, thank you, James and Kyle, for all the work that you're doing and for your candid conversation today. And thank you, Tracey, our fearless leader. And we will see you all soon.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely.
All right.